So for me, the value of a test like the Myers-Briggs test lies not in its ability to describe the human personality. Um, it lies not in its ability to predict what kind of career that you will go into as a result of being a certain type of person. Um, that's a false assumption that many people make, not only about psychological tests, expecting them to describe you, but also about scientific theories in general. Um, and I think that many people think of scientific theories as mirrors, as mirrors that are held up to nature and reflect the reality of what is there. They have this descriptive role, whereas I think psychological theories and scientific theories in general are more like tools that serve a purpose. In order to explain what I mean by that, you just have to look at the history of science. Um, Science works by gathering data, having a hunch or an idea about what might be happening behind the data, and coming up with a hypothesis. A hypothesis must be testable. So you run an experiment and you get results and you realize if your hypothesis is true or false. And on the basis of that, you accept or you reject your hypothesis, your theory. So right there you have an idea of the purpose of scientific theories, which is to marry data together into a coherent whole which makes sense to us. Otherwise, it's just isolated facts. We have to find a way of framing this and making a picture out of it. That's one purpose of scientific theories. A second purpose is to allow us to make further predictions, because on the basis of this model, further scenarios will suggest themselves, and we can make if-then sentences. If this theory is true, then this is also true, and we can run experiments and we can test these things. So it allows us a degree of it allows us to predict, and therefore allows us a degree of mastery or control over nature. So this is the value of scientific theories, and it's very important that when we have a scientific theory, that we resist the temptation to view it as objective reality, as a mirror held up to reality. It's only a tool that will allow us to make predictions and have a concept of what's going on. And we can see this very, very clearly if you look at the history of science, and you can see how often scientific theories have been overturned and replaced by something new. So for example, in physics, we used to think of the atom as being a solid ball reacting or interacting with other atoms. Then that was replaced after Ernest Rutherford's experiments with a model in which the atom was like a solar system with a hard nucleus at the middle and electrons spinning round. This was challenged by quantum theory, where we began to understand that atoms and particles in particular, in general, behaved like waves. So they had this wave property, and more recently you've had models based on strings, for example. Each of these models described the available evidence at the time. Now, if you look at that history, and it's the same with so many disciplines, if you look at that history, you can see that the value of scientific theories lies not in their ability to describe an objective reality, but to marry together the facts that are available at the time and allow us to make hypotheses and predictions. So scientific theories are not mirrors, they are tools. They are tools, they are human constructs. We construct them for a purpose. Now, if you come back to something like the Myers-Briggs test, then you can understand, well, you can ask yourself a meaningful question, right? A meaningless question would be, what is the personality that this test is trying to describe? Because it is not a mirror. A meaningful question is, what do I gain as a result of doing this test? And I would argue that this test functions in a very similar way to the way that a fairy tale does, or an allegory does. Now, I don't want you to make any judgments here. Fairy tales and allegories have real value because they contain types of people, of persons, of characters that we recognize. We instantly recognize these characters, and we know that we have the potential to be this character or that character at certain times. That's because fairy tales were written by humans who have lived complex lives, as we do. It's the same with the Myers-Briggs test. It gives us a framework to recognize certain dispositions in ourselves. Now, why can't we recognize these without that framework? It's simply that we need a little bit of a push in order to turn our eye inward and reflect. And we also need a little bit of classification. Classifications can help us begin to understand something. They can give us that push, they can make us reflect. And after that, it's up to us. It's up to us to explore whether or not these classifications have any value, whether or not we recognize strengths or weaknesses in these classifications, whether or not we want to take action on the basis of the knowledge that we gain of ourselves. And that, for me, is the value of the Myers-Briggs test.